Recording in progress.
Microphone system? All right, good evening, folks. For those of us joining remotely, we'll be a few more minutes. We'll start at 6. Just one more minute, folks, and we'll get underway. Thank you. Okay, good evening, everyone. Hello, my name is Scott Curry. On behalf of the entire South Huron team, it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to this public consultation on municipal user fees. I'll be the moderator this evening. It's a relatively small audience, so I don't think I'll have too much trouble managing this crowd. But I do need to advise you that the meeting is being recorded and published to our YouTube channel so that anybody who wasn't able to attend tonight is able to view the discussion. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to get feedback from you, our community, as South Huron undertakes a review of our municipal user fees. I'm joined by my colleagues, Kay Farwell, Deputy Clerk, Alex Wolf, Deputy Treasurer, and Alex Wolf, our Clerk, and CAO Rebecca Masuya-Collison, and Julia Warwick, our Treasurer, is somewhere in the building as well. It's our pleasure to welcome you tonight. The format of the meeting is relatively straightforward. Following these opening remarks, we're going to have a brief presentation by Mr. Stefan Krechranovich with Hamson Consulting. I apologize, Stefan, for getting your name almost right. Stefan's presentation is going to be about 25 minutes or so. And after that, we're going to have lots of time for questions and answers, as well as comments from everyone here. So the length of the meeting will depend on the engagement level. We're prepared to go to 7:30 if we need to, but it's up to you and the nature of the questions and the discussion. So more on that when it comes time to the question period. So let me just start off by giving a quick, brief summary of the project that we're undertaking. So it's been 9 years since South Huron conducted a comprehensive review of our user fees, and a lot's changed during that time, as you can imagine. It's very important that we review our user fees and validate them for reasons of equity. We need to periodically review our fees to ensure that we are striking the right balance between users of our fees and the general tax levy who helps pay for these services as well. To assist this project, South Huron engaged Hamson Consulting in the spring of 2023. They prepared an analysis as a starting point in this review. Hamson debuted their analysis at the March 4th council meeting, and all of their study and materials, as well as information about the project, is available on the South Huron website. It's called the User Fee and Revenue Generation Study page. Now, this consultation period tonight is not the start or the end of the public input period. We are welcoming feedback from the community until April 15th. So there's still lots of time to provide input following tonight's meeting. We'll take it in written form by dropping off to town hall or emailing staff. There's really no way you can miss us. We're happy to receive any and all input from the community. Now, to be clear, this project is not a cost-cutting exercise, and it's not an evaluation of which services the municipality should offer or not. Those types of projects are necessary and are carried out periodically. Tonight's discussion is about user fees and discussing the best balance in South Huron between funding these services with user fees versus the general tax levy. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stefan, who can lead us through his presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. I'm going to share my screen, and if you can just give me a thumbs up that that it's being viewed, and I'll start straight in.
Yep, you bet.
You can see that?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you, Scott, and thank you everyone for taking the time to attend this evening. I'm going to spend about 25 minutes just speaking about, as Scott mentioned, the findings of our user fee and revenue generation study, which was released last month, and we went to council with a similar presentation of the findings earlier this month. I'll be speaking a little bit about what we were retained to do for the municipality, and also talk a little bit about the legislation that regulates how we do these kinds of analyses and the methodology we've used for each of the different services. It sort of varies a little bit from one service to the next. We're certainly interested in hearing from members of the public this evening about what council should do with respect to fees. Certainly, if you've seen our report, you'll see that we focus very much on the cost recovery principles, and a lot of the fees that we've calculated in our report are the fees that would be required to recover the full cost of delivering municipal services. Sometimes those costs are a little bit difficult to identify, so we've relied extensively on analyzing similar fees that are imposed for similar services in similar municipalities in and around South Huron, and we'll talk a little bit about that benchmarking exercise as well. And then finally, we're going to go in. I'm going to hand it back to Scott, and we'll go into a Q&A session. So I mentioned that to the extent that we're really looking at fees so that we can recover the costs of a specific service that's provided to a specific user. And therefore we need to look at what the cost is to provide that service. We also then need to, for each service, consider what is the appropriate amount of cost that should be recovered through the fee, and that may vary depending on the service. And then finally, with that information in hand, is to calculate what the fee structure and the fee rates should apply in order to achieve the cost recovery targets. We've looked at most of the services that are fee funded in South Huron, and they're listed here in this table. Building and planning is really about the fees that are charged to for the building permit review process and the planning application review process. The corporate services and financial services fees are going to cover licensing fees, fees for special events, and on the financial side, fees associated with administering the property tax. The environmental services fees are really focused on when people are renting municipal equipment, or when municipal public works staff are maintaining water meters or installing water meters or shutting off or switching on water meters and other utility related services. The community services is focused on recreation and park usage. And the facility services are really related to the rental of facility space. Fire and emergency services, as you can imagine, are dealing with very specific services provided by fire staff, like answering false alarm calls and producing fire inspection reports. And then finally, there are fees that are charged for services that the municipality provides for maintaining its municipal roadways. And you can see at the bottom there that we're not looking at the fees for associated with the landfill, the cemetery, waste management in general, and development charges. I don't intend to get into the legislation too much, other than to say that sort of the overarching piece of legislation that governs fees in municipalities is the Municipal Act. And under the Municipal Act, South Huron has quite broad powers to establish fees for services it provides, costs that it has to incur for those services or the use of its property. The costs that it can fund are quite broad. They would cover operating as well as capital costs and services, whether they're mandatory or discretionary. And there's no right of appeal to these fees to the Ontario Land Tribunal. The planning application fees are governed under the Planning Act, and the rules for setting those are somewhat different. The only thing I would point out about these is there's a certain amount of rigor required to establish these, because the cost recovery has got to be done on an application type basis. There isn't a right of appeal of these fees to the tribunal. So that is another reason to make sure they're done rigorously, shall we say. And then finally, for the building permit review process, the Building Code Act regulates those fees. Here, there's a special requirement that a public meeting be held before any changes to these fees is done, and that public meeting is going to be held early next month. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the various approaches we've used in setting the fees. So a lot of the fees are, as I said, seeking to pay for the cost of providing services. And for a lot of these services, the major cost is the cost of staff time. And so getting to grips with what it costs the municipality to provide the service means figuring out what staff spend what time on each type of service. And this is referred to as activity-based costing. And we've spoken with staff in each of the departments to kind of map out exactly where the level of effort is and how much time is associated with providing the services. We've looked at this. We've looked at costs in their totality. So we've looked at the cost of the people who are delivering the service directly to the user, but we've also looked at the costs associated with the administrative departments of the municipality that support the direct cost service providers, if you like. Things like IT support, HR support, finance council, the CAO, etc. As I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes this is not it's not straightforward as to what the costs are. And so we have relied in such cases on a benchmarking review to see what other municipalities charge for similar services. In some cases, we are just simply looking at the cost of recovering, a specific material or a very simple process like making a photocopy, and we're just simply trying to identify what the cost is and flowing that through directly to the user. There's no real staff time involved with that. And then finally, recreation is a little bit of a different animal. Here, we have to balance cost recovery considerations with some of the factors that Scott referred to in his introduction, which is, with recreation, there may be benefits that accrue to the broader community rather than the specific users. And this is particularly true of, we want a healthy community, so we want kids to learn how to swim. We want people to be generally healthy, so we want them to participate in recreation. There's ability to pay fee considerations when setting rec fees. So the fees that are in our report are not full cost recovery in the same way that some of the other services are. And then finally, we've also looked at areas where the municipality provides services but does not charge a fee, but could, and we've identified new fees for these kinds of services. Just to give you a sense of the scale of the financial impact of fees in South Huron. So this is from 2022, the last year for which we have financial information. At the time we did the analysis. So user fee revenue for the services that we've been talking about was just over $1.2 million. And the biggest components of that revenue related to the recreation fees, which is about 38%. It's the gray portion of the pie chart here. And then, another 43% of that revenue was related to the building and planning application review process. And that's in the green and the gold portion of the pie chart. So those are the major fee revenue generators: the recreation, the planning, and the building operations. And I mentioned we've looked at other municipalities in the area. West Perth, Huron East and North Perth to the north, Lucan Biddulph to the south, and Lambton Shores to the west, as well as the town of St. Mary's. The question came up at council and has come up during some of the consultation as to why some other municipalities were not reviewed. So generally, you'll see that, to the east, there are municipalities that are a little bit more urban, like Stratford, a little bit faster growing the closer you move towards the region of Waterloo, less agricultural, less rural character than South Huron, perhaps. And in the specific case of Bluewater, the municipality Bluewater, which is north of South Huron, they were actually undergoing a user fee review last year. And so we felt that, the fees that were on the books, so to speak, in Bluewater were not particularly representative of what might be coming out of that review. And so that particular municipality was left out for that reason. So I'm just going to go through each of the services and very briefly describe the findings. So this is the planning application review process. And you can see the full cost of this service is around $335,000. And the breakdown of those costs is shown in the pie chart. The majority is related to salaries. And there are sort of other operating costs, like the cost of office space, telephone overheads, that sort of thing, and that are shown here in gold and gray. And then in the red, there's a component that represents that corporate overhead indirect cost share as well. So $335,000. The revenue that the current fees generate is just under $122,000 per year. And therefore, in order to recover the full cost of the service, overall, a fee increase of 64% would be justified under the Planning Act. You'll remember that the Planning Act requires this very specific approach to fee setting. So the 64% has not been applied to each of the planning fees across the board. Some fee types have been increased higher than others. So rezoning applications, for example, the percentage increase is lower than 64%. And for official plan amendments, the increase is higher than the 64%. And when we look at the current fees compared to other municipalities, currently South Huron's fees are a bit of a mixed bag. So for site plan applications, the fees are quite low. For minor variances and rezonings, they're sort of in the middle of the range. And for consents, subdivisions, and official plan amendments, they're a little bit higher than the benchmark range. But it's important to note here that there's no municipality in the benchmark list which has imposed full cost recovery fees. So our report presents those full cost recovery fees for council's consideration. They're going to be much higher than your neighbors if they are introduced, but nevertheless, they do represent full cost recovery. There's one or two new fees that are shown here at the bottom, and there's a slight restructuring of the site plan fees to reflect the way the applications are actually carried out. The review is carried out. Moving then to the corporate and financial services fees. Just a reminder that, this is a pretty low revenue generator, so it's not in the grand financial scheme of things. This is not a hugely material revenue stream for the municipality. Generally, the current corporate and financial services fees are in line with what other municipalities are charging. And for things like marriage licenses, they are already recovering the full cost of service. So generally, our recommendations is to maintain the existing fee structure and the fee rates. You'll see the recommendations below here. There are some areas where additional fees could be introduced for some licenses, for example, and some property tax administration activities. We also recommend that these fees be indexed annually so that they keep pace with inflation. And there are one or two fees on the list that are sort of redundant and can be removed from the schedule. On the water, wastewater, and utilities side of things, so as mentioned, this is really related to equipment rental, as well as water meter maintenance and installation, and also fees where the municipality is introducing new services for the first time. Again, like the corporate fees, this is a relatively low revenue generator, $76,000 a year. It's very difficult to benchmark these fees because there's a very unique structure to the fee in South Huron that is quite unlike other places. So our recommendations are to update the hourly rates that are applied for staff services so that they reflect full cost recovery, to replace fixed fees for vehicle rentals with hourly rates, and the province releases a bulletin that establishes these kinds of rates for municipalities, so it very nicely ties in with the information in that bulletin. Where the municipality is selling materials to users, there should be a markup that is introduced to cover indirect costs. And there are some increases to other maintenance fees as well, where we know that you're below the benchmark average. There's one or two new fees, and there are one or two fees that can be discontinued because they are redundant. Now on the recreation side, again, this one is a major revenue generator. And this slide really just sets out for you where the municipality is compared to the benchmark range. So there are about 100 fees in the current bylaw, and we've looked at about 60 fees moving forward. So there's quite a lot of fees that can be discontinued. And of those 60 fees, for the most part, they are in the lower end of the benchmark range. There's about a quarter that are in the middle of the range, and there's about 15% that are higher than the benchmark range. And you can see in the color-coded chart here where things are lower within or higher than the range. Generally, the bar charges in the South Huron Rec Center are quite high, or relatively high. But things like the banquet hall rentals in the South Huron Rec Center, the arena floor rentals, the use of the Crediton Dashwood Community Center, the use of Port Blake Park and the sports field, they're all relatively low. I should just mention here too that it's become apparent over the last couple of weeks that there are one or two fees that are being recorded in other municipalities that may include HST. So that will need to be corrected moving forward. It's a fairly minor correction that's required, but just wanted to make it clear that some of the bylaws that are imposed in that are in place in other municipalities are not don't make it clear that HST is included or not included in the fee. So we will correct that. Just in terms of then the recommendations for the recreation fees, Here, what we're trying to do is, we're focused less on full cost recovery, because as I say, there are other considerations to factor in when setting these fees, not the least of which is you don't want to deter people from putting their children in learning to swim programs or, playing hockey at the arena. So what we've done is we've looked at the historic rate of cost recovery in the municipality, and we've looked at the rates of cost recovery in similar municipalities nearby, and we have set a cost recovery target of 30% of the direct operating costs. And that represents a 7% increase in cost recovery from the 4-year average up to 2022. In order to get to that cost recovery, the municipality would need to increase most of the fees, but some more than others. So as you can see at the top here, of the roughly $500,000 in revenue that is generated for recreation services, about 2/3 are for ice rentals. And so we're recommending a 22% increase in the ice rental fees and a roughly 10% increase across the board for the fees for the parks, for the programs, and for the pools, and for the space rentals. There's some service-specific, program-specific adjustments that are slightly different than the 10%, but for the most part, it would be about 10%. We're also recommending that the municipality establish a more formal tracking system for the usage of the programs and participation, and that'll make fee setting easier moving forward. There's also some new fees that are recommended for where staff time is incurred, for advertising in the arenas, and for memorial plaques, and for camping in Elliott Park, which is right now done on a voluntary contribution basis. And again, we would recommend that these fees be indexed on an annual basis to keep pace with inflation. The fire fees are set to recover a portion of the cost of fire staff when they're responding to false alarm calls, illegal burning, and non-residential vehicle incidents, as well as preparing sort of incident reports. Again, this is a very low revenue generator. These fees are rarely full cost recovery in any municipality, and nor should they be, to be honest. And the current fees in South Huron fall within either the middle or the low end of the benchmark range. So our recommendation is to keep the current fee structure. For the most part, keep the current rates, but there are 1 or 2 areas where you could increase the current fees to reflect the benchmark average. The transportation services. So again, these are fees for the municipal roadways, really trying to recover the cost of vehicle rentals, including associated staff time. Again, a very low or relatively low revenue generator. The current fees are within or lower than the benchmark range. So the recommendations are not too drastic. Certainly where staff labor is involved, we recommend adjusting the fees to ensure the full cost of that labor is recovered. That would include direct and indirect costs. And as with the environmental services fees, replacing the fixed fees with hourly rental rate fees prescribed by that Ontario bulletin. And then there are a couple of fees where we can identify costs that can be recalculated to recover those full costs. There's a new full cost recovery parking permit fee that can be introduced, and there's 1 or 2 fees that can be discontinued. So just wrapping up then, there are some recommendations in our report that would apply across the board to all the services. One of the recommendations would be to more regularly undertake a comprehensive fee review. Most municipalities, and certainly urban municipalities, would do this every 5 years. ensure that fees generally are increasing at the same rate as operating costs by having annual indexing provisions in the bylaws. Monitor the municipal benchmarks so that you can keep track of when, for example, Blue Water undertakes a fee study and makes significant changes to its fee rates. Introduce a surcharge on non-residents from other municipalities who use the rec facilities or the municipal roadways. So introduce a 10% surcharge on the fees that are charged to residents, and then continue to make information on fees accessible to the public via the municipal website, which the municipality does a good job of currently. So Scott mentioned that this evening's not the only public consultation that's being done. As I say, we went to council a few weeks ago. We're having this session tonight that'll focus on all of the services except for the building code service. That will be dealt with at a statutory public meeting under the Building Code Act on April the 2nd. And then there's another session scheduled for April the 29th in front of Committee of the Whole to discuss the feedback that's received through these sessions and through the website survey. And also there will be some staff recommendations presented at that April 29th meeting as well. So certainly I would welcome any questions, and I'm going to pass it over to Scott. The survey will be available on the municipal website. I think that's forthcoming. But thank you again, everyone, for attending tonight. Scott?
Thank you, Stefan, very much. Okay, so we have a relatively small crowd tonight, so I'd like to keep this as conversational as possible. With people joining remotely, can I maybe get a hand up to see if you'd like to ask a question? I'll try and enable the mic for you. If you're joining remotely and you want to ask a question, you can also use the Q&A button and type in your question, and I can relay it to Stefan. Okay, so the people in the room, what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite you to come to the podium if you want to make some remarks or ask some questions. I think I'd like to ask that you limit yourself to 2 minutes for the question. If there's lots of interest, we can go multiple rounds, but 2 minutes at the microphone at a time, I think should be enough time to phrase a question or the comment. Can I get some hands up on whether you agree? We all agree 2 minutes at a time? Okay, great. Would anyone like to ask a question or make a comment? All right, come on up.
I think most of you know who I am. I'm a local realtor here and live in the community and have lived here all my life. I looked at this proposal and I looked at a glaring thing that said an average to increase some fees by 64%. We have every politician and every bureaucrat talking affordable housing. How could we ever think that any of this would be a benefit to affordable housing? And why wasn't North Middlesex and Blue Water? It looked to me like you picked and choose to get the results that you wanted. Just because Blue Water is in the process of studying their fees, so does every other municipality. So why would you take the two neighboring municipalities and delete them from the study?
Okay, great question. So I heard a couple things in there. I think we'll start with the comparators. Can we give some explanation as to why was it Blue Water and
North Middlesex?
Blue Water and North Middlesex were not included in the analysis? Stefan, I'll start with you. I think you mentioned part of the answer.
Yeah, thank you to the questioner, and I think that yeah, part of the part of the Blue Water answer is because we had a very specific situation that we knew about in Blue Water. And I think we thought that if we were going to be comparing to the current fees in Blue Water, that would really misrepresent what might be in place when council was making its decision about fees here in South Huron, because that study went to Blue Water Council in December of last year, and we did our analysis sort of before that. So that was the specific reason for that. But your point is well taken, and I appreciate the comment. But that was the reason. I don't know. I can't remember offhand why we would have excluded North Middlesex, but what I can say is when we were reviewing with staff from at the beginning of this process, as to who we should compare to, we were really looking at municipalities that were of similar size, for one thing, that had similar growth rates. So there's been quite a lot of development pressure in this part of the world, but it hasn't been equal. And sort of as you move east, it becomes a little bit greater. And I think South Huron is not immune to that development pressure. But at the same time, it retains a sort of an agricultural, rural characteristic. So we were trying to sort of match municipalities that met those physical characteristics in South Huron. But I don't really have a good answer for the gentleman as to why North Middlesex was excluded.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. I think I'm going to go to our CAO to provide a little bit more information on the next steps for this part of the question.
Thanks, Pat, for the question. It's a good question. Staff are actually aware and acknowledge those pressures, as well as economic pressures and housing, for development. And as such, staff always keep in mind our neighboring municipalities, and we're bringing back to council with recommendations on benchmarks for North Middlesex and Blue Water. Because that is something that our director or CVO, staff always keep an eye on what other people are, the fees in other municipalities. But the other piece of it was that the county is also undergoing a planning review. They hope to have their information back before the committee of the whole that we're going to have for our council. So we'll have that information as well. And so we'll be basing any recommendations, staff recommendations from the public consultation, as well as local benchmarks, as well as the county information.
Okay, and the other part of the question was the 64% increase and how that might affect affordability of housing. Stefan, can you provide a little bit more context for that number that you have put forward for consideration?
Yeah, certainly, and it's a very good point. I think I just want to reiterate or make clearer that our report is not necessarily recommending that council adopt any specific percentage increases to any of the fees. But it is very important that when council makes decisions about the level of appropriate cost recovery, that it understands what the full costs are. And so I do think it's important that our report identify what the full cost recovery planning fees are, and those do represent a 64% increase in the current fee rates. Another way to put this might be that, to the extent that these review services are undertaken to benefit applicants for specific developments, that the municipal taxpayer in South Huron has been, up to now, subsidizing that process to the tune of 36%. So that's the flip side of looking at this. So, but of course, council has the discretion to implement whatever fees it wishes. But certainly we feel that it's important they understand what the full cost is when they're making those decisions. Thank you.
Did you want to have a follow-up, Pat, comment or?
Well, it seems to me that we're all paying property taxes. And yet I look at this tonight and everything that the municipality provides, you want to charge additional fees. So where do the property taxes go? Like, it seems to me all of this stuff should be handled through the taxes instead of, and Stefan said, you know, developers, they'll be glad to pay more money. That's nonsense. That is all fed down through to the price of a house. And anybody that thinks the developer is going to absorb all that is living in a dream world. Thank you.
Okay. Next question received remotely. Stefan, after reviewing the final report, I would appreciate some clarification on what components factor into South Huron's current minor sports fees for sports field use. In addition, when looking at the benchmark comparison with other municipalities, there appears to be vast discrepancies between municipalities on what they charge for minor sports fees for sports fields use. Are all centers being provided the same? Are all centers providing the same services? And let me know if you want me to rephrase or repeat any of that.
No, thank you. I got that, Scott. I want to make sure that I take the time to just look in our report before I answer. So these are for sports, minor sports for sports fields.
Correct.
So we are talking really about fees that are charged for the rental of ball diamonds, whether they have lights or unlit fields, for sports tournaments in the parks, and for horse ring games or soccer games, where there are dressing room facilities, or for minor sport participation in minor sports where there's a per registrant fees. I guess I would say that you know, generally these fees are lower or at the low end of the benchmark range. It's very rare in my experience that these fees would be charged on a full cost recovery basis, because they're often engaging you know, adolescents and children in activities where there is a, you know, community incentive to have these park facilities being used for those kinds of activities for the health and wellness of the community and families. So certainly, you know, from our recommendations, consider that even though there's opportunities to increase these fees, that they should not be increased, you know, more than the 10% range, give or take. But generally, those fees, I think, are lower than what you would see for similar kinds of services in other municipalities.
Okay, fine, thank you. I'm going to stay with remote submitted questions. This one about specifically about karate fees. How were they calculated, and were there different session offerings considered and factored in? I don't know if you addressed to that resolution, but specific question about karate fees and how they were calculated.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, we could have been a little bit clearer in our report about this one. So right now, there are no karate fees that are charged by South Huron through its bylaw. And that's because karate is provided by private operators. There's, I think, 3 of them, 2 or 3 active in South Huron. So they're provided by private operators. And the municipality acts as a collector of the fee and then a remitter of the fee to the private operator. What it does not do, however, is charge add to the fee to recover a portion of the private operator's use of municipal facility space. And so we think when we say in our report that the municipality should be introducing karate fees. What we're saying is that it should adjust the fees that are charged, that it collects on behalf of the private operators to, it should mark those fees up to ensure that it is collecting some revenue to pay for a portion of the cost of its facility use.
Would you say it's common for municipalities to treat this type of service as a rental to the service provider, and then the service provider recovers their costs from their clients?
Yes, that's right. And that's effectively what's happening, is that the municipality is renting or allowing the use of its space, renting the use of its space for a private service provider, but it's not actually recovering any, it's not charging a fee for any of that space usage. And for, you know, when it's renting its space directly to, you know, to users, for example, for the banquet hall in the South Huron Rec Center, it would charge a fee. So I think the same principle would apply, should apply for things like the karate in the I believe it's the Exeter School gym, for example.
Okay, thank you. So just a reminder, if you're joining us remotely, please type in your question in the Q&A. And here's one more. Darren Kintz, representing South Huron Minor Hockey and the Exeter Hawks junior team, to not include the municipality of Blue Water and their current ice fees impact this study. Currently, the two arenas in Blue Water would need a 30% increase to match the current South Huron ice rate alone, and an additional 22% proposed increase. So I believe Mr. Kintz's comment is that there is a bit of a gap between the fees charged by each municipality. And do you have any comments on that, Stefan? If we are that higher or lower than our neighbors, can you just reiterate where we are and what direction we could go with our fees?
Yeah, Scott, to the commenter, I mean, I do think it's important that council understand what its neighbors are charging. So certainly I agree with that principle. I would point out that since we received the feedback from council that, you know, we should have looked at Blue Water, we have looked at Blue Water's historical cost recovery for recreation. It is considerably lower than it has been in South Huron historically. So if there are fee discrepancies between the two municipalities, and I don't know, by the way, whether their fees have been increased as a result of their user fee review. And it would be good to know that before we be too definitive about this, but I do think it's important to understand that historically Blue Water has recovered less of its costs through its fees than South Huron has, and that may well explain why the fees are lower for these kinds of services. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think what I'll do now is if CAO Rebecca Masuya-Carlson, if you could maybe explain how staff recommendations going to the committee of the whole will include Blue Water, a consideration of Blue Water rates. So we will do that comparison before this study goes to committee of the whole.
Yes, thanks, Scott, for that. And we will be doing that for all the fees as well. Like when the recommendations that we bring back to council will have Blue Water, for example, North Middlesex, some of our surrounding municipalities, as well as staff recommendations. I'd like to reiterate, Stefan has said that this is like the data, staff recommendations still to follow.
Okay, very good. Okay, yeah, thank you for the question, Darren. I'll go back to the in-room. Maureen, come on down.
Thank you. I'm only going to ask one question right now, but I have a lot of other questions as it goes on, but I want to stick with the benchmarking piece. You would have received the report that I sent and presented to council last night about Blue Water specifically and the benchmarking piece. We know totally that we've missed the mark on the benchmarking of other municipalities when we've missed Blue Water, in light of the fact that it is closer in population than Lucan Badolf, and it's closer than North Perth, which has been used in the study. So to say that it was overlooked because it did a fee study last year would beg the question, all of the municipalities or most of the municipalities do a fee review every year in June. And so they have all of that information ready for the next budget. So they would also know their costs. So I would think when you're benchmarking, you need to look at how many times those fees have been increased through the years, but not in South Huron. So to say that Blue Water was looking at their fee structure, so was Seaforth. Their bylaws are in 22. So that part does not fit with the benchmarking. When we talk about the karate fees, just because I'm up here, the karate is in the schools. It's not in the facilities here in South Huron. It's not in the arena. But pickleball is. And I don't see it on the thing. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on these costs for minor hockey. And I will bring you up with the benchmark per people that you've used in Seaforth or Huron East. Their minor hockey is $140 and your proposal is $160. So just when we're looking at that benchmarking, let's be sure that we've chosen the similar size municipalities that are close to us in Huron County, that the hockey players or the ice players or whoever wants to have any sports is going to have to travel to those in order to keep it economically feasible for their families to keep their kids in sports.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Are there any other questions or comments in the room? Well, Maureen, you might as well come on back. So you mentioned you've got a few. If anyone else has questions, please raise your hand. But Maureen, I'll give you 2 minutes for each question.
Okay, so it's actually to do with my presentation last night, right? And the comments about the benchmarking for the different areas. So in South Huron, we have said that it's 138.05 for ice time for prime and 94.69 for non-prime. In Lucan, on your schedule, the table, it says 199.82. And when we pull up the bylaw from Lucan that was done in 22, it says prime and summer is 176.83 plus HST. So the numbers that are provided don't match the numbers in the table. If those numbers are actually including HST, that has been very misleading. Here in East, their bylaw was done in 22 as well. Their prime is 166 an hour, both for Seaforth and Brussels, and the non-prime is 110. But interestingly, they specifically put in their bylaw, minor hockey and figure skating are 140. There's nowhere on that table that's even mentioned. There's nowhere in that table that they consider minor hockey at all. And just for the record, if you want to pay $700 for your kid to play hockey, that's great. If you need to increase it by 22%, you're looking at $1,000 a kid to play hockey. So when they're going to look at the hockey thing and go, oh, well, it's too much, really. So minor hockey might say, well, we'll have to cut the ice rental. So we can cut the amount of hours that we rent from South Huron, and we can go to Blue Water and rent it cheaper, or Seaforth. And we will have our A teams that need the high ice time. I guess I was just talking, wasn't it? So does say in the report, similar size municipalities. So I wonder, would you look at the similar size municipalities within Huron County to get your answers? That would be my first question.
So, Stefan, the question is, circling back to comparators. Could you provide a quick review of the ones that were chosen and why? And then I think, Rebecca, I'll ask you to explain again the steps to take this information to the committee of the whole. As I understand it, you've made an open council commitment to compare our staff recommendations to our neighboring municipalities that were missed. So first to Stefan and then to Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I mean, I agree with the commenter that it's important to, when you're comparing, to try and ensure that when we look at similar size municipalities, we look at population, although population is not necessarily the only measure of comparability, should we say. And I think it's fair to say that, recognizing that there are one or two municipalities that were not benchmarked for the reasons I gave earlier, that are still comparable in population, I wouldn't say that any of the municipalities that we did compare with are not comparable because of their population. So St. Mary's, North Perth, Lucan, these are all, between 5 and 15,000, and South Huron is sort of around 10,000. So to my mind, these are all well within the kind of range of population that, in my view, would be reasonable, recognizing that, on that metric, we could have included more municipalities.
Okay, thank you. And Rebecca, yeah, you mentioned that staff are going to do a comparison before this comes to committee.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Short answer. So that comparison will get done.
Okay. The other part was the municipality of South Huron was credited with doing their FIR or their for early May 2023 for 2022. And we know that that's very close to that time of going to be happening. And I wonder why we would not use the actuals from 2022 for costing for your 30%, which is higher than these similar municipalities on your table for 23%. So why we chose 30% over 23%, and secondly, why we could not use the 2023 actuals to determine the actual costs.
Okay, I think I'll start this answer with a further question. I'll need some help with the deputy treasurer. Kate, when did we submit our FIR statement for 2022?
It was in early May.
Yeah.
The deadline for the FIR is the end of May. It's requiring audited statements and whatnot, which is currently happening within the next few weeks.
Right. So the 2023 audited financial statements are not yet ready.
They are not.
And so okay. So that's part of the question. Now, the other part is for our comparators, they don't all, all municipalities don't submit at the same time. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Can you give us a sense of when there's a deadline?
There is a deadline. However, when looking at some of the municipalities, it ranges from the year following to 2 years following. Sometimes they get submitted, and they range right from January of the year through to January of the following year. So it's quite a vast difference as to when people are submitting.
Okay, so given the timeline of this analysis, the best available data at the time was what we used.
That is correct.
Okay.
So the best available projection is what we used, right? That's what we've been using for the costs.
I think we used the audited financial statements, so the actual costs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Not projected,
2022.
The actual costs.
I'll read for 2022.
Correct.
That's right. But for
Yes.
projecting our costs now,
Mhm.
we're looking at 2022 plus an increase.
Yes.
Right. But we do know that those numbers are available probably before the end of May.
They are due to the province by the end of May. However, there is an audit process that the province, I believe, goes through as well. So just because we submit at the end of May doesn't necessarily mean that they're available from the province on the FIR website at that point in time.
Would they be available to council?
I'm not 100% sure when the audited financials go to council. I would have to confirm that.
Okay. I just think that it looks like we're doing all of this when we actually have the actual numbers, which I believe we had from the building department last night or on Monday night.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, I've known times when things sit on a desk and I'm just wondering if those are actually ready now.
No, they are not.
Okay.
So the building report that went to council last night is a legislated report with the deadline and timeline associated
Okay,
with it,
yeah.
which is why it was presented when it was. The further financial information won't be available yet.
Okay. So it's due by the end of May.
Correct.
Okay, that's an important piece to know. Okay. So the benchmarking was used exclusively to supplement the cost analysis and information on current and future costs and services levels is often limited. So by not providing that, we are limiting those future cost analysis is what the consultant has said.
Stefan, do you have a comment?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but I want to make clear that I don't believe that the absence of 2023 FIR information in any way undermines the quality of the analysis we've done on future costs, future cost recovery targets, or the recommended recreation fees.
So could I just clarify what I think you have said about the costs? Just,
Oh, absolutely.
I just want to be sure that I've got the right analysis here. It says that based on the assumptions, the anticipated revenues for 2024 total 721,000 under current fee rates as outlined on table 24. Targeted revenues must be determined to establish a shortfall based on current rates. So we're basing it on a 30% increase. Is that correct? 22% increase.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a 30% increase. Is what we're saying is that under the current fee rates, which are recovering about 23% of direct costs, you're generating around $721,000 in revenue this year. That's our estimate. If you want to achieve a 30% cost recovery target, i.e. higher than the 23%, you would need to recover revenues of $849,000. So you need to increase the fees so that the revenue increases from 721 to 849.
Okay, I read that. So then that means that the ice rentals will be increasing from the revenues from the ice rentals are increasing from 299,000 to 570,000.
No, the ice rental revenues under the current fees would generate around 468,000, and with the increase would generate around 570,000.
And so that's an increase of 270,000.
No, it's an increase of around 103,000.
Oh, so it was 299.
I don't see that figure in table 24.
It is on the table when you did the perspective, the retrospects.
Sorry, if I may interject, it's on table 23,
Yeah.
Stefan, under the ice rentals 2022 total.
Yeah. And it's 299,000.
Ah, right. I see. Yes.
Yeah. So, and you're proposing 570, which is an increase of 270,000. Is that correct?
Well, from 2022, yes.
Okay, so from the current fee of what ice rental people are paying, you're wanting them to pay another $270,000.
Well, no, we've got to be very careful here because
Okay.
the 299 is the revenue that was collected in 2022. And remember in 2022 that participation in ice time rental and hockey was still very low because we were still in COVID. So the projection for 2024, the revenue projection for 2024 is going to be significantly higher than 2022 because participation has rebounded now that COVID is over. So we haven't looked at the COVID year as a basis for establishing a revenue projection for this year.
Okay, so you haven't looked at the projection, but it is going to, the expectation is that that's what you're asking to increase it to.
No, because what we're assuming for 2024 is that the municipality is going to generate around $468,000 in revenue because participation will be a lot higher in 2024 than it was in 2022. And we're assuming that it's the current 2024 rates that are in place, not 2022 fees. So the increase in revenue that would be generated by the proposed fees in our report would be about $103,000.
Okay, and so we'll know that when our FIR numbers are released, we'll have a better idea of what that actually, how those predictions actually turned out, correct?
Well, no, you'll have the actuals for 2023. You won't have the 2024 figures, which is what we're talking about in our report, until May 2025.
So the plan is to increase it by 22%. And what is the expenses expected to increase by?
Sorry, I'm just
To have
going
the
to
cost
interject
recovery.
real
Okay.
quick, Stefan. So there is no plan at this time, just to be clear. This analysis is for discussion. There's no plan, there's no decisions made, just to be clear on all of this.
Yeah. I'm just asking questions, right? Yeah, so you'll be able to take it back to the staff, the questions, right? That's what I'm getting at, right?
We are staff.
So if those FIRs are available, the staff would say, here they are. That's what I would presume, but that's not for me to say. So when we looked at the cost recovery, is it direct or indirect? And how much is it going to expect it to increase in order to get the 30%?
Yeah, that's an important question. So the 30% cost recovery target is a cost recovery of direct costs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the direct.
Sorry, go ahead.
Do you have an idea what the direct costs are for ICE now and how it's calculated?
So the direct costs that are the direct costs that we've used to establish the fees are those that have been budgeted for 2024.
Budgeted cost. So what is the budgeted cost for ICE in South Huron for 6 months of ice time?
So that number I'm going to need to get back to you on because that's not at my fingertips, but certainly in our modeling.
And that's great because I think ice time here in Exeter or South Huron runs on like 5 or 6 maybe months a year, right? And so with the added space, we would expect that we will have higher costs. But do we absorb all of those costs for empty arenas? Like who's paying for that? Who's paying the other 70% of all of the costs here?
So there are some costs, sorry, I should say, when we're looking at the cost of ice time, we are looking at the cost of the arena as it's required to provide service for flooded ice for minor hockey. So there are costs in the arena that are unrelated to minor hockey, and those are related to other fees. So for example, the rental of the banquet hall or the kitchen or the bar charges or the arena floor in the summer when there's an activity that's occurring on the concrete floor. You know, those costs are, and those fees are separate from the costs and the fees associated with the ice time.
So if we take something like Stephen Arena, we're only paying, somebody's only paying for, the users are only paying for the months that they're using it. And then the public is on for the whole other 6 months? Like who's
Well-
paying for that empty arena?
Well, the taxpayer. So,
Yeah.
so the extent that some of the fees paid by minor hockey are offsetting a portion of the cost to maintain the ice and the facility during the winter period, the remaining portion of the cost of maintaining the ice is borne by the taxpayer, and the taxpayer also covers the cost when the arena is not being used for hockey in the summer months. Other than there are some fees, as I say, that are collected for, you know, space rentals and that sort of thing. But no, the taxpayer unquestionably pays for a significant portion of the cost of maintaining the arena,
The empty arena.
whether it's empty or being
Yeah.
used.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. And 2023, the budget is 2.7 for costing for recreation.
That's
Is
right.
that correct? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's an increase of 500,000
From the
2.2.
2022 budget.
Yeah.
I think I'd have to confirm that, but is that number, are you getting that number from our report?
I think I either got it from that or the FIR.
Okay.
It was 2.2 was included. Oh, there was 49,000 included in long-term interest in the FIR in 2022.
Yeah, so we just got to be a little bit careful when comparing budget figures with figures that are reported in the FIR.
Mhm.
And not just because the reporting may be different, but also because one is actuals and one is budget figures. So I would be a little hesitant to just confirm the 2.2 million you mentioned without double checking in our modeling.
Oh, sure. And that's just why I
Yeah.
brought it forward.
And,
That was
yeah,
and
fair enough.
Maureen, I think it's important that we direct our questions around the report to Stefan. If there's questions around the FIR, staff can assist with that.
That's why I'm bringing it up tonight, because it's in my report and the FIR was part of the analysis done. It was used when they couldn't figure out the other piece. It's included in this. That's part of the comments, the FIR, right? So when we're comparing the FIRs in other municipalities, that piece of the debt and the interest shows up there. So that's why Lucan's is more reasonable, because they put some of that into their debt. Anyway, those were my little comments, except for, I don't know about the ring that we have. The ring that we charge for, I don't know what that is. When we're putting a fee schedule, when I'm doing my thing, there's
Are you referring to the horse ring?
I guess so, yeah, I guess that's what I was referring.
That would be the horse ring.
Yeah, I just don't know who uses that or what that is.
To my knowledge, there is the Saddle Club in Exeter, I believe, that uses it. No? The rodeo uses it.
The rodeo uses it. Yeah. So the fee for the rodeo is that piece, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And I do have a thing about the karate and no comments about the pickleball. I find that kind of, it's not in there. Pickleball?
Yes, correct. That was an oversight on our part. So
Okay,
it has
yeah.
been identified as to be coming forward with a stack of
Okay,
recommendations.
that's good. And
Yeah.
thanks for your time. I
No,
think there's
thank
enough
you.
in here to you can carry on now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Maureen.
So for people that have joined us remotely, if you want to type your question into the comment, or excuse me, the Q&A button, we can relay that to our consultant or to staff. And while we're waiting, are there any more comments in the room or questions to be asked? Okay. Well, it sounds like we have exhausted the question for now. I'll remind everyone that we are taking comments until April 15th on any aspect of this study. We're happy to answer any questions or provide you any information you're looking for. Please contact staff at any time. Okay, we're here to help. Input received tonight will be used to construct an online survey so that we can get even more engagement and create another opportunity for people to provide input. They can react to what they heard tonight. And we can truly make this conversational because we do want, sincerely, we do want people's input on this. It's very important that we get the balance right in South Huron between user pay revenue and tax revenue to pay for services. And so with that, again, if you're looking for content on this project, it's available on the user fee and revenue generation study web page. And on behalf of the